Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. We've been talking about ways to connect the different parts of your game, and in particular ways to randomize the connections between different parts of your game, because having the different events happen in a different order and having some of them happen in some plays and not in others can increase the sort of variety and interest on the part of people playing your game. Now, all of the methods so far that we've discussed have been one way. You are at A, and then you go to B, and then you go to C, and you can't sort of go back to A. And of course, you might want to be able to go back to A. You might want connections such that you can explore an area, but then you can turn back and go back to where you started, and so on. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. As you can see, I've set up a sort of dungeon crawl looking set of tunnels and connections, and I've got these links underneath the picture. I've got the picture at the top, and then I've got these links underneath the picture of which say N, E, S, and W, and of course they represent north, east, south, and west. This isn't the most intuitive way to do this. If I had more time, I would have put west, sort of the west link over here, the east over here, and the north up here, and then just have the south one down here. But this is just to show you a particular way of doing it. So, for example, if I choose to go west, we end up at another four-way junction. If I go west again, we get another four-way junction. And if I go west yet again, we get a tunnel. And if I go south, here you can see there no longer is a north link and there no longer is a west link. There's just east and south, which matches what we can see in the picture. If I go south, we come to a three-way junction. And the point is that this is consistent. If I go north again, we will get the same only two options, and then if I go east, we should get the same series of four-way junctions. So it's a consistent, and indeed we do. So it's a consistent environment, and you can explore it more or less without limit. Okay, so I won't do that forever. So that's what I've done, and now I will spend the rest of the video demonstrating the code, which is somewhat complicated, and I would say that if you are finding that I'm being unclear or something doesn't quite gel, don't be afraid of rewinding and watching it again. It is complicated, and I am moving fairly quickly, and I may not explain things clearly. And if you still don't get it after a couple of watches, please feel free to leave a comment asking me, whatever you need to ask. This is a very small channel, and so I can pretty easily read every single comment and respond. But I will do my best. So let's get into the first page, initialization, and I'll go through the variables here. We've got T. That's just the measure of how connected the different areas are. I've set it to 75, which means for any two neighbouring areas, there's a 75% chance that they're connected. You always start with a four-way junction, but this number determines how many tunnels, or what the chance is of tunnels for all of the other areas. Then I've set M, which stands for map, and this is the new concept for this video. We've already dealt with arrays. We've dealt so far with one-dimensional arrays, which are sort of analogous to perhaps a line of post boxes or pigeonholes, where each slot can have a separate value put in it, whether that be a number or some text. Well, now we're going to deal with two-dimensional arrays. And the way we set up two-dimensional arrays, there isn't a command that says make M a two-dimensional array. What you have to do is set M as a one-dimensional array and then set up the individual slots of that one-dimensional array to themselves be arrays. So this is what we're doing here. We go set M minus 1 equals square brackets. In other words, M minus 1 is itself an array. And that means we can now refer to, say, M minus 1, 2. In other words, we can refer to slots, at least in that part of the array, with two numbers. And we do the same for M0, and we do the same for M1. Please note that it's perfectly legitimate to have negative numbers. We use the analogy of a line of postboxes, but of course, unlike a line of postboxes, it doesn't have to start at 1. It can start at, it can go into negative numbers more or less indefinitely, and it can go up more or less indefinitely. So we set M0, M minus 1, and M1 to themselves be arrays, and then we set M00 to be this string of text. Bear in mind this is text even though it's numbers because we have these quotes here. That's telling the computer this is the character 1, then the character 1, then the character 1, then the character 1. It's not 1111, the numerical value. They are quite distinct as far as the computer is concerned. Now, what this means is that M00 has tunnels to the north, east, south, and west. I've used the order north, east, south, and west, just going clockwise from the top. And a 1 indicates that there is a tunnel, and a 0 would indicate that there is no tunnel. So 1, 1, 1, 1 means a four-way junction. Let's say we had a tunnel that was going west to east with no junction. That would be 0, 1, 0, 1. In other words, you can't go north from there, you can go east, you can't go south, you can go west. And I've made a note there, the order is north, east, west, south, which again is arbitrary, but I just found it easier. Now, I should, at the moment, I'll just get out of, or pull this to one side, and I'll just show you a change that I've made to the actual program folder. I've got these two new subfolders, Map Originals and Map. Map Originals is these graphics that I got off the internet, which I will link to in the description. And I've got one picture for every possible arrangement of whether there's a tunnel going north, south, west, or east. And the name of the picture corresponds to the alignment of tunnels. So for example, 0010, we know that means you can't go north, you can't go east, you can go south, and you can't go west. So that would be a dead end coming from the south. And so I've got Map Originals, and then I've got Map, which is the one that's actually used in the game. As I did before with the pictures for the different character races, I kept the originals. It's always a good idea, even if you alter the pictures, it's a good idea to keep the originals because you might find that that alteration isn't what you want anymore, and you might, the sort of least altered version you have to work with, the better quality the picture will be. All else being equal, you might not want to keep it in the same folder as the actual game, but you probably should keep the originals. So I've got these pictures, and the pictures use that same format as the text that will be put in M. So moving on, I have hx equals 1 and lx equals minus 1. As I said, we have to set up arrays in each slot of M individually, and we need to know which ones we've done that for and which ones we haven't. HX just stands for highest X, and LX stands for lowest X, and all this is doing is it's telling the program, okay, we've set up a two-dimensional array in everything from -1 to 1 inclusive, and that way it'll know if we get to a new X value that we haven't set up yet, it'll know to set it up. Then we set X to 0 and Y to 0. That's just the starting coordinates. And then I just have a note to myself saying that Z and W are going to be the temporary variables. I usually use Z, Y, X, W, V, and so on as I need them as temporary variables. Of course, in this case, X and Y are better used as coordinates, so I had to skip those. And having done all that, we then go on to the next screen, which is called display. So, display, what is this? Well, what it says here is look at M, X, Y. That is, look at the slot in the M array which corresponds to our current coordinates, which will be 0, 0 at the beginning of the game. And obviously will change as we explore. So W will be some sort of string made up of 1s and 0s, indicating where the exits are. Then I've said set Z to be square bracket img square bracket map slash something like 1111 dot png unsquare bracket, and then later on I've just put Z, which just means print out the string Z, and once that is printed, the program will recognize it as being a command to display an image, and it will display the image that corresponds to the value of W, which in turn corresponds to the relevant slot of the M array. In other words, draw a picture, or not draw a picture, but pull up the picture that corresponds to the tunnels that lead from the particular place where we are. BR just means put in a couple of line breaks. And then I've got this this link, and I've got basically the same code 4 times. What it's doing is essentially it says if there's an exit to the north, give them a link, give the player a link that they can click that lets them go north, and then this one is the same for east, and then there's another couple for the other 2 directions. But let's go through this in detail. Now, as we've said, we've got W, and W is a string of 1s and 0s. So it's something like, it'll be 1, 1, 1, 1 at the start of the game, and there'll be other things as we go. Now, this is new. We've used square bracket number, unsquare bracket in our arrays before, but we know that W is a string. Well, we can use that same format for strings. This just means the first character of the string W. So this is just saying computers generally start at 0 rather than starting at 1. This is saying if the 0th character in the string W, in other words the leftmost character or the first character, is equal to the character 1, then do this. And what this is a link. And I'll go through this. We've seen this format before, but I'll go through it again. We've got the square brackets, we've got N, that is the text that displays. Then we've got this divider that divides the text that displays from the destination. So it's saying display the character N. If it is clicked, send the player to the page named move and add 1 to the variable y. Now, the usual way that coordinates are dealt with is that as you move to the right, the x value gets higher. As you move to the left, the x value gets lower. And then as you move up, the y value gets higher. And as you move down, the y value gets lower. And I've used that convention, and I've also used the convention that north is to the top. So using those two conventions, if we move north, that will add 1 to our y coordinate. And that's why that's there. Then I've got very similar code, but for east, if the second character, W1, is 1, then give them a link to move east. You'll notice that it takes you to exactly the same page. The only difference is that it, instead of adding 1 to y, it adds 1 to x, because in this version, if we move east, we add 1 to x. And then I've got the same thing for going south. Still takes you to move. All of these take you to the same page. It's just that they alter different variables depending on the direction. This time, if we're going west, well, that's equivalent to taking 1 away from y. And then finally the same thing, but sorry, I think I might have missaid that. If we move south, that's equivalent to taking 1 away from y. If we move west, that's equivalent to taking 1 away from x. And then I've got /div, which just means that's the end of the paragraph. You remember we put div align equals center up the top, which means start a paragraph and it's aligned to the center. And then /div ends the paragraph. And so the effect of that align equals center is that the N, S, E, and N, E, S, and W's are also centered. I thought that looked a little bit better. So whichever one the player clicks, it will alter one of X or Y, and it will move them to, or it will move the program to this new page move. So there's a couple of things that happen here. This is, as you may remember, we have to set up the slots of M individually as we go. So this is, and you probably remember that HX is the highest X that we've done that for so far, and LX is the lowest X that we've done that for so far. So what this says is if our current position is over or equal to HX, then add 1 to HX to make them, to make HX higher again, I guess, and then set MHX to be an array. I could have actually said, instead of putting over or equal, I could have put equal, because X only changes by 1 each time, and so it never can be over. It can only ever go equal before HX is increased, but I put over or equal. And then if X is under or equal to LX, the lowest X we've had so far, do the analogous thing. Set LX minus minus, which means take 1 away from LX, just as that means this one means take or add 1 to HX. And then set MLX to be an array. The reason we need HX and LX to be higher and lower than the current version is because we'll be looking at the neighbours of where we are as well as where we are. So we might need to look at M one less than our X value and then some Y value, and so we don't want to generate an error, and that's why we need to do that. So tell the computer that we're turning this one-dimensional array M into a two-dimensional array in particular slots. Then we have, if this exclamation mark means not. If not, mxy. Well, what does not mxy mean? It just means if mxy hasn't yet had any value put into it. In other words, if we're in a new part of the map, if not mxy, if we're in a new part of the map, then we need to work out what the value of mxy is going to be. If we are not in a new area of the map, if mxy does have a value, then it skips all of this. And you can see this because I don't think I've ever explicitly said this, but whenever you have an if, everything within that if and the corresponding closing of the tag, you should indent it, because it makes it a lot easier to follow what's going on, and it makes it a lot easier to spot when you've made errors. So you note that I've indented everything within that, and then when there's an if within that, I've indented stuff inside that further, and then there's another if here, and I've indented stuff even further. And it makes it a lot easier to follow, because if you want to find the equivalent else's and etc., you just need to sort of draw a line downwards. So we know that this else is part of this if, and then if we scroll down further, we know that this end if is part of this else and this if. So please do indent your program. You will find it a lot easier. But anyway, so we know that if mxy is new, then we need to do a whole bunch of stuff. We need to set up the value of mxy. If mx already has a value, we can just skip all that and go back to display. But let's assume that we are in a new area. And I've got the same code. I've got basically the same code 4 times, because I'd have to do it once for each direction. You notice that I have these comments north, north, and then I have the comment east and so on for the other direction. So I'll just go, they're basically the same, but I'll just go through north in detail, and then I'll quickly skim through the others. So what does this do? If not mxy plus 1. Well, mxy plus 1 is the area to our north. And remember that we want the map to be consistent. And so if the area to our north has access to the south, has a tunnel going south, well, we need a tunnel going north, because otherwise that tunnel to the north wouldn't really be able to move south. So we need that. And conversely, if the area to our north doesn't have a tunnel going south, well, we don't want a tunnel going north. So if not mxy plus 1, this should actually be a comment. I must admit that was a mistake, but anyway. So if it's undefined, then generate a random number between 1 and 100, and if that number is under or equal to t, which you might remember from the beginning is the sort of chance of a tunnel. Basically, the higher t is, the more tunnels there'll be, and the lower t is, the fewer tunnels there'll be. If a random number from 1 to 100 is under or equal to t, then set z to 1. Otherwise, set z to 0. So that's what we do if there's no tile to our north. If there is a tile to our north, then just have a look at the value of m for that area to our north, and then look at W2, which is to say the third character, because that's the one corresponding to south, remembering that the directions, we're treating them in the order north, east, south, west. So look at the third character, and then just set z to be the same as that. So to put that in English is there an area to our north that's already been defined? If so, look at whether it has a tunnel going to the south and set Z to be 1 or 0 based on that. Otherwise, set Z to be 1 or 0 based on random chance and the value of t. So that's determining whether we have a tunnel going north. Then we have to determine whether there's a tunnel going east. And it's basically the same, except that it refers to mx plus 1y, which is the area to our east. And instead of saying z equals 1 or z equals 0, it is z equals z plus 1. And that doesn't mean what you might think. The character, because we're dealing with strings, plus doesn't mean change any values. It actually just means put something on the end of it. So the character 1 plus the character 1, and we know this is a character because there's quote marks around it. The character 1 plus the character 1 doesn't equal the character 2, it equals the string 1, 1. And the same as if it was 0. The character 0 plus the character 1 doesn't equal 1, it equals the string 0, 1. So that's the only difference for each. We're adding a character to the end, and we're referring to the area to our east. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. And if that area does exist, then look at the relevant character and its value. And then we have the same thing for south, and then we have the same thing for west. I won't go through it. It's just that it looks at a different neighbour, and it looks at a different string in that neighbour's value, if there is one. So what all that does is it gives us a four characters, which are 1s or 0s, and then we set m, x, y equal to z. In other words, we give m, x, y a string of 1s and 0s, 1, 0, 1, 0, or 0, 1, 1, 1, or whatever it may be, which tells the computer what tunnels lead from that area. And then finally, we go to display, and that's why, just incidentally, as I said, I made this mistake of I should have deleted that, but you won't see it because when you go to it clears the screen. So it would have, if it sort of did print that text, it wouldn't show up because the go to sort of wipes it out immediately. And anyway, so then it goes back to display, and display will display the picture that corresponds to the tunnels that lead from where we are. And that is that. I'm sorry that, as I say, that took quite a lot of time. It is fairly complicated. Don't be afraid to ask me if you didn't understand something, and don't feel like you should necessarily get it on the first go. But that is how we can set up what you might call a sort of dungeon-like set of connections between different areas of our game, and we can actually have more or less unlimited areas so the player can explore fairly freely. Of course, we haven't put anything in those areas yet. We would need to have a separate system which determines whether the given area has, might have monsters and traps and treasure and perhaps some special encounters that we sort of hand-coded as well. But I will get into that sort of stuff in a later video. I hope it was useful or interesting, and I hope you will join me next time.